I am going to be your moderator today. Please allow me to start off by thanking all our attendees taking your time to attend today's session. And most importantly, we would like to thank our presenter, Dr. Chet Harris, for his effort with preparing and giving this presentation. Before I officially introduce Dr. Harris to you, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and important information. So for the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand if you would like to speak, or you can type your question in the chat box and I will then indicate to the presenter to address your question. And the recording link for the session and the presentation slides will be uploaded on our Moodle community by the end of this week. And we also have a feedback survey, which will be sent out during the session in the chat box. Maybe please request that you fill the survey out for us to gain some insight on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve in the future, as well as to provide some kind words to our presenter for their hard work. And this will also be used for issuing attendance certificates. Before I can present the facilitator to you, please allow me to introduce him by reading out his bio. So Dr. Harris, Dr. Chet Harris is a senior lecturer in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He is the former director of the department's African Center of Epistemology and Philosophy of Science and works under the ACEPS project, Rationality and Power. His other research interest is in the methodology of social science, especially the problem of external validity. So without wasting any more time, I would like to hand over to Dr. Harris.
Thank you, Keketso, and good morning, everyone. Before we get into the main presentation, I see that the numbers are small enough so that we can get an indication of who we are and our backgrounds. That will help me understand who I'm talking to and also maybe link what I'm talking to some of your own specific concerns and contexts. So can I ask if anyone has the guts to raise their hand and switch on their camera and their mic and explain who they are and what they are pre-registered for. So for example, you would switch on and say, I'm doing an MA in sociology, or I'm going to be doing a PhD in psychology or philosophy. Do we have any volunteers? Anybody? There we go. Vimbai?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's like my camera is switched off from your end.
It's fine. You can just explain what you are pre-registered for.
Okay. Morning, everyone. I am Vimbai Mataruse, and I'm currently in my pre-registration year for a PhD in strategic communications. Thank you.
Okay. If you don't want to do it on the mic, if you don't want to do it live, please feel free to type it into the chat. That way I can still get some information about who we are and what we are doing. Okay, we had some people typing, but I don't see anything. Okay, so are you able to see any of the chat? Hi, good morning.
Morning. Ricky Ngandu. I pre-registered for a PhD in applied data science.
Okay, interesting. And
Yep.
then we've got one in the chat. Thank you, Ricky. Registered for MA in industrial design. Okay. So I think I get the picture. We have a range of different disciplines of different degrees. Another one pre-registered for PhD in social work. Okay, good morning and welcome, Matloma. So the aim of the session is to give some advice about things you can think about when it comes to choosing a supervisor and topic. So I'm aware that I'm speaking to you as a philosopher. I'm speaking to you from a specific perspective. And we have a range of different disciplines. We have a range of different sort of practices and conventions. So I'm going to try and keep the advice as generic and as useful as possible to you. But feel free to stop me at any point and ask me if there's anything you don't understand about what I'm trying to convey. We've also got Zainab, first year of pre-reg for a PhD in architecture. Okay, welcome, Zainab. So let me start sharing the slides with you. Okay, so just to start, I want to share my own journey with you, just to show that not too long ago, I was in a similar situation as you are in now. I also have a perspective of the academic project as someone who's sort of both an insider and an outsider. Please just give me an indication if you can see my slides in slideshow mode.
We can see your slides, Dr. Harris, but it's not on slideshow.
How about now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So I've got a unusual, or maybe not so unusual, history of work and career in academia. I'm not someone who's followed the typical trajectory straight out of school, straight into my first degree, straight into honors and then masters and PhD. I'm someone who sort of for a long time had a foot inside and outside of academia, as displayed in the timeline. So I finished my honors degree in about 2003. For a long while, I then worked outside of academia before attempting a master's degree while still working. Okay, that first attempt didn't work. I'll explain why. And then in 2007, 2008, I left full-time employment to complete my master's. And then again, once I was done with the full-time master's, I left academia and worked outside of academia for a few years until rejoining UJ as a PhD student in about 2014. I joined as a PhD student on something called the GES program. And within a couple of years, I had then sort of found my way into a lectureship. I was appointed a lecturer in the second year of my PhD, and completed my PhD in 2019. And I've been working as a full-time academic since then. So why I show this timeline is because during this period, I had different experiences of both supervisors and topics, and the lessons and the failures from those experiences could come in useful to you now as you decide what your topic should be and who your supervisor should be. So during my journey, I had 3 different experiences of supervision. Sorry, my slides got stuck. And those experiences are going to be a useful lesson to you as you start your journey. So at the moment, you've got this perspective of the university. You know that housed within those buildings there, as you can see, APK campus, you've got a range of expertise. You've got a range of people who could potentially shepherd you successfully or unsuccessfully on this journey towards your master's degree or your doctoral degree. But there's a choice. Okay, so who do you choose? UJ is quite a big institution. The size does vary according to the disciplines, but still, we are a big place. We have lots of choice for you. How do you make that choice? How do you do some research? What factors do you take into account when deciding who the best potential supervisor could be for you? And part of the problem is that the idea of a supervisor is slightly alien to number one, to people who are not fully in the academic space. Okay, so if you aren't someone who's been in academia from day one, if maybe you've been outside academia or spent some time away from academia, like I did, you might not appreciate what the difference is between a supervisor and a lecturer, for example. If you are in the corporate world or if you are working full time at the moment, you might wonder what the difference is between an academic supervisor and someone who's a supervisor in the workplace. And my comments today are maybe going to give you some guidance about how you think about that relationship. So if you come through the South African education system and the South African university like UJ, you are typically exposed to large class sizes. Okay, so your idea of an academic is someone who stands in front of a room of hundreds of people and gives you lectures, and you take those comments home, you take the readings home, you study what he sets for you or she sets for you, and then you write an exam at the end of the day. And the problem is that when you get to master's and PhD level, the relationship with the supervisor is something completely different and something a lot more intimate. And so a completely different set of dynamics and factors come into play. So really where the supervisor relationship comes from is from the Oxbridge system. And the typical picture of what a supervisor is what you see pictured here. So at Oxford or Cambridge, even if you come in as a first year student, your first experience of an academic is not someone standing in front of a big room delivering a lecture. So typically you would join a college and your college would assign you an instructor, and you would be given the address of this instructor, where his offices or her offices, where her room is, and you would report in that first month of study, first week of study, and say to your supervisor, to your instructor, I'm so-and-so, and I am studying philosophy. And the two of you would sit down and have a discussion about what it is you hope to achieve from the course, what sorts of topics your instructor conceived of you having to master in order to get through the course, what sort of essay, what sort of thing you would have to write by the end of the course. And you would sit in the rooms like this. This is a co-supervision. So it's one student with a co-supervisor and an instructor. And you would be sent away you would come back the following week or the following month with some written work. And you would present this work to your supervisor. And this is the research you had done on the topic that he had assigned to you for that week or that month. And he would sit and read the work and discuss the work with you, and then give you feedback, give you some constructive criticism, explain where he thought your faults or your shortcomings were, what work you needed to do in order to correct those. And so you see the dynamic is completely different to the dynamic that you would have typically with a lecturer. So if you're wondering, what is a supervisor? It's not quite the same as the supervisor in the work context. It's not quite the same as a lecturer. It's more like a guide, more like someone who's there for, to personally guide your research and guide your degree to completion, and hopefully successful completion. So if that's what the supervisor relationship is, you might still wonder, well, how do I then decide who's going to make a good supervisor for me, for my project and in my context? And there is some stuff you can do. Okay, so you can do some basic research while you are in your pre-registration phase that is going to start to give you a good idea about who could potentially supervise your project at UJ. Now, there's some obvious places to start, and I'm sure some of you have already begun looking at these places. So, for example, on UJ's website, if you go to the departmental pages, you will see biographies, okay, little snippets of all the staff at UJ. So this is the departmental staff page for our department, for the philosophy department. All the permanent staff are on here. Some departments even have postdoctoral fellows, postgraduate students, etc. But it's a particularly good resource for you in the pre-registration phase because it gives you a good rundown of everyone who works in that department. So, for example, my colleague, Dr. Singh, very usefully lists something called AOS and AOC. So AOS stands for Area of Specialization. So this is the areas of research where he's actually published, okay, where he considers himself an expert. It's related to his PhD. It's related to the published material that he's put out there since his PhD. And so he feels like, as an expert, this is the area where he's most suited to supervise in. And that is meaning of life, applied ethics, bioethics, etc., etc. And there is also listed what he calls AOC, which is areas of competence. Okay, so these are related areas, so areas that are linked to his specialization, but where he isn't maybe as comfortable calling himself an expert, but where he's still equipped to supervise, at least on the lower levels. Okay, so he might not be the sole supervisor of a PhD project in these areas, but he'd be happy to supervise a master's project, an honors project, or act as a co-supervisor in a PhD with someone who's got the relevant expertise. So the reason we encourage our staff to do this is because any potential or prospective postgraduate student or pre-registration student can come in, glance at what he says about his areas of specialization and competence. And then if you feel like possibly this person could be a good match for you, you can then make contact with him. Okay, so this is linked to his email. This is linked to his phone number. And so we encourage you to make contact and have a discussion with him about the potential for supervision. Other people, give broad supervision areas, not necessarily broken down into specialization or competence, but the idea is the same. So if you have any sort of interest in aesthetics, the philosophy of art and dance, then Dr. Bailey is the person to contact as a potential supervisor. The other thing is that we also list our affiliations. So when Kuketso was introducing me, she mentioned that before I came to the philosophy department, I was directing a center called the African Center for Epistemology and Philosophy of Science. And I'll explain that this might be something that could factor into your choice of who you choose as a supervisor. At UJ, in the humanities department, we have both departments and centers. Sometimes there's overlap. So sometimes centers are housed within departments, but often researchers like Professor Mitova here would focus almost exclusively on publishing research in the center's area of specialization, which is epistemology and philosophy of science. And so that center has quite a big cohort of honors, masters, and PhD students, and they sort of clustered their expertise under that center, and she is a supervisor for all of those students there. So your first port of call, I would advise, is to look at a page like this. So the department that is hosting you, go and look at their pages and all of their profiles and see who could potentially be the best fit for you as supervisor. Okay. And then dig a little deeper. Okay, so once you have, say, a short list of people who you think might be suitable as supervisors, don't just look at their profiles on the UJ site. As academic scholars, you also have things like Google Scholar, you have a Scopus profile, you have various places on the internet where they show your output. Okay, so they show what you've produced as an academic. Some of them going back to the beginning of your career, some of them just your the last 3 to 5 years. And look at what this person's been publishing. Look at where this person has been active, and look at whether potentially that would make a good fit for you in the areas that you are interested in researching. And if possible, look for a CV. Okay, so get some more insight into this person, where they come from. Has their trajectory followed a similar path to yours in terms of interest, in terms of their background? And then you can make a decision about whether you feel, this is the right person for me. Okay. So some other factors to think about, and this is based on my own experience. This is based, as I say, on my own positive and negative experiences of supervision in the past. So my master's and doctoral supervisors, these are based on real people. Okay, these are real people. I just don't want to say who they are to protect their identities. They are still active, not all of them at UJ, but they are still active in academia. And you might bump into them one day, or you might even choose one of them as a potential supervisor. I did my master's at WITS and my PhD at UJ. So the first example of a supervisor, I'll call him Professor X. And this was the person that I chose as my supervisor when I attempted my first MA, which was an MA by dissertation. Okay, so I was working full-time in media at the time, and I thought that I would attempt a master's degree while I was still working. So I was in contact with Professor X because he was one of my lecturers from my undergraduate degrees at WITS. He was a mentor to me. He was someone I admired, I looked up to. I had a really good relationship with him when I was an undergraduate student and an honors student. He also has an amazing just public profile. He is prolific as a researcher. He's published multiple books in the field that I'm interested in. He's got a massive reputation. He's massively popular in the community in South Africa. And when I spoke to him about the potential for supervision, he mentioned that his expertise was sort of aligned with what I wanted to do in my MA dissertation, not squarely aligned. So he would not have listed my dissertation topic as an area of specialization, but it was certainly an area of competence. Okay, so in my mind, this was the perfect person to supervise my first attempt at a dissertation and a research master's. But unfortunately, it was a complete failure as a supervisor-supervisee relationship. And I still can't pinpoint exactly what it was, why my first attempt at a master's failed. We had a good working relationship. He just wasn't able to get me to produce the work I needed to produce to make the project a success. Okay, a couple of years later, after that failure, I decided to give the master's another attempt. This time, I went back to full-time study and I did a master's by coursework. And in the course of explaining to the department what my research area would be, they introduced me to someone else I'd never met before. He had joined the university in the interim. We'll call him Professor Y. He had just recently joined from North America. I had no idea who he was. I was not familiar with his work. I had no rapport with him. But what was told to me was that his expertise was exactly what I needed in order to make the project a success. And indeed, that was the case. Okay, so we never really developed rapport. We never really developed a good interpersonal relationship. But he could guide me because he had published in the field. His expertise was sort of unquestionable on that question. But still, I consider it a partial success because although I completed the master's and I did the dissertation, I passed, I felt like I underachieved and I felt like I didn't really get the sort of support I expected from a supervisor for a project of that size. And I can give you some insight into why I felt that was the case. So the way things worked at the time is that the supervisor would give the dissertation 1 mark, the external examiner would give the dissertation a different mark, and then you would get the average of the 2 marks. So as you can imagine, in 99% of the cases, the supervisor will be more, what's the word? You'd have a more positive outlook on the work than the external examiner. So typically, a supervisor will give you 1 mark, and the external examiner is expected to come in, I don't know, 5% lower, 10% lower. In this case, he scored me, I think, 15% less than what the external examiner scored me. And the feedback that he gave as justification for why he gave me that score included things that he had never ever mentioned in the year that I was working with him. I felt like I always had to beg for access. I felt like he wasn't really invested in the project. In short, I just felt completely unsatisfied at the end of that master's, but I passed. Okay, I got the degree. So in a sense, he was more successful than my first supervisor. A few years later, again, it was time for me I decided I'm going to do a PhD now. Professor X, actually, my first supervisor, advised me to migrate across to UJ and do a PhD under another new professor, Professor Z, another guy I had absolutely no previous experience of, no idea who he was. Met him basically when I was registering for the PhD. And again, I was told that the expertise wasn't fully aligned with the project I envisioned, but was somewhat aligned. Okay, he had some experience of a related field. So just, for the interest of detail, my PhD was in the philosophy of economics. His expertise was in philosophy of medicine, but there are linkages, there are similarities. And so they thought it would work as a supervisor-supervisee relationship. And initially, we had absolutely no rapport. Didn't know each other, didn't really have any sort of connection with each other, but developed it slightly over the years that he supervised me. A year into our supervision, a year into my degree, he left and became the dean of the faculty. So again, it sort of complicated the relationship because now he wasn't only my academic supervisor, but he was basically also my boss. So there was this weird dynamic, which I felt, in a sense, helped the supervision. Okay, so it sort of made the lines a lot clearer about what exactly the supervisor relationship was in that case, and resulted in long-term success. And I say long-term success because not only did I complete the PhD, but he was also able to then use our supervision relationship during the PhD to launch the first part of my research career. So that's the other thing I'm going to give you as advice in looking out for a potential supervisor. When you look at those profiles, when you look at the projects they've been involved in, when you look at where they've worked, think to yourself, is this someone not just who's going to help me to pass at the end of the day, but depending on what your goals are, is this person going to help you take that first step on your academic career? So you might want to end up in academia as a researcher, and you need to decide, is this the person who's going to give me that stepping stone onto my first publication or my first set of publications post PhD? Okay. Just before we get onto some other things to think about, often new PhD students or new master students confuse the supervision relationship with some other things that supervisors are not really equipped to do. So I always ask new philosophy honors, master's, PhD students to do this exercise, and we can do it now for a minute. Visualize for a second the day you graduate with your doctorate or with your master's. Think about what you would have achieved, okay, what you would have done in terms of research, what you would have accomplished. Think of walking across that stage and receiving your degree, receiving your gown. Now ask yourself, if I compare myself now to that person who's walking across the stage, what do I lack now in order to get there one day? Who's got some thoughts on that? So if you look at yourself today and compare that with future you, who's got the master's and who's got the PhD, what do you think are some of the factors, some of the things that you lack at the moment, but that you are going to need in order to get to what you are visualizing? I can't see the chat or the hand, so if I can get some help.
Okay, I will monitor the chats for you, Dr.
Okay.
Harris.
Any ideas? Think of it another way. Why do universities not just sort of allow you to set off and do the dissertation on your own? You are capable at this point. You've got some academic background. You are obviously talented. If you are accepted into an institution like UJ, you've got access to all the research you could possibly want. You've got access to the library. If you are in an empirical field, you can be given access to do your surveys, collect your data, whatever it is. Why do you think institutions don't just say, there you are, this is your study, go away and do it? What are you lacking in order to get that achieved? Does that mean there's nothing you are lacking, or you can't think of anything that you are lacking? Okay, so they're the obvious ones. I mean, there's obvious the expertise in the field, but what else? What do you think someone who's been in academia, I don't know, 5, 10 years longer than you have been in academia, what do you think, what are some of the insights they might have that could be beneficial to you in achieving what you want to achieve? Still nothing? One brave soul, yes.
We have a hand up from Katlego. You may go ahead, Katlego.
Okay.
Good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
I would say what supervisors have is a varied range of perceptions when it comes to whatever field that they specialize in. Because I believe no matter how hard you work or you research, there are certain angles that you won't be able to see because you're just looking at the research from your perspective. So with the help of a supervisor, they can get you to understand certain angles and perspectives that you can't see.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want someone who's got the expertise, but who might have a slightly different perspective on the question that you are interested in. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, that's perfect. So For example, if you are taking position X on a question, you might benefit by finding someone who's taken the opposing argument about that same question. That's going to enrich your work. That's going to enable you to see possible objections, possible perspectives on this question and on your dissertation that you possibly don't possess at the moment. Thank you for that. So those are the sorts of things you look for in a supervisor. But students often confuse that with a different set of needs, a different set of things that they require in order to get their work done. And my point here is that supervisors are not, for example, therapists, okay? So yes, you will need some motivation in terms of your morale, in terms of psychological motivation in order to get this work done. And to an extent, supervisors often do, and they can provide that to you, but that shouldn't be what you look for in a supervisor, okay? If that's what you need, there are places you can go to. UJ provides assistance in terms of PsycAD, in terms of support through the postgraduate school and other places. But remember that your supervisor is your academic supervisor. So he's got the academic, or she's got the academic expertise to allow you to achieve what you want to achieve. So your supervisor should not primarily be your therapist. Okay, your supervisor is not a lecturer. So you don't expect your supervisor to be the person who explains the content to you, explains the field, who explains the research to you. Your supervisor is not your research assistant. Okay, so your supervisor is not the person you rely on to tell you what you need to research in order to answer your dissertation question. Your supervisor is not your editor. And in the current sort of environment, we find that this is a major obstacle to successful supervisions. You can procure the services of editors. You can procure the services of people who are going to help you with your language, your grammar, your punctuation, your writing. But if you're going to take someone who's an expert in social work, an expert in sociology, an expert in architecture, and turn them into your copywriter or editor, then you've basically wasted the opportunity to work with this person. You are not using them optimally. Okay, this is not what they train for. This is not what they are there for. The supervisor is not your policeman. Okay, so the supervisor is not there to force you to make deadlines that you should be making en route to completing your degree or your dissertation. So those are things to think about in terms of what to look for in a supervisor and in a supervision relationship, and what to avoid, what you should not be looking for in a supervisor. The final thing I'm going to say is there's often a big benefit to finding a supervisor who is attached to a research center. So I'm aware I'm speaking to people outside of my field. Some of you are not even in the same faculty, but I think the same is the case for most faculties at UJ. So a research center is basically an entity that the university sets up in order to cluster specific expertise, and they do that with the aim of fostering relationships with other research entities on the continent and around the world. And what that does is it makes those entities more attractive to research funding. So you get things like bodies in the EU, in the UK, in the States, that have millions to fund research in, say, public health. What they look for in a body to fund is a body that has a network around the world that would make it easier to collect data on public health on different continents, for example. And so many of these research centers in Europe, in the global north, look for partners in the global south. And this is exactly what happened with this center, which a colleague of mine set up. It's a joint center between the University of Durham in the UK and our department. It's not the only one. In fact, there are many, even just in humanities. So if you are looking for where your potential supervisor is based or is hosted, you can look at a department. So all the faculty's departments are listed on the left, the orange tree on the left. And then all the research entities are listed on the right. So you can see it's not just one or two. There are quite a few of them, and they are a growing number. And like I say, the benefit is not just that you're more likely to find an expertise that's aligned with yours, but in terms of the early part of your research career post-degree, so after your master's or your PhD, can often be accelerated more if you are aligned to a research center instead of a department. The people in the department do research, but they are also very focused on teaching, on running those departments that they work for, whereas the people on the right, the research centers, are solely focused on producing research. And if I look at the numbers for postgraduate students who publish an article or chapters or other publications during their degrees, often it's the influence of the center, because they are constantly being invited to workshops, to conferences, to collaborate with scholars in those fields. And so one thing to think about is whether you want to choose a supervisor who's solely linked to a department, a teaching department, or whether you would prefer to accelerate your research by linking yourself to a supervisor who is part of a center. Okay, so those are some of my thoughts on how you go about choosing a supervisor. And so the main lessons, based on my explanation of my own sort of research and supervision background, is that yes, consider the person in the department that you may know. Maybe you attended their lectures in the past. Maybe you know them personally. Maybe you've worked with them in some sort of capacity. So rapport or previous engagement can be beneficial to a supervisor-supervisee relationship, but it's not always necessary for a successful supervision. And it's not always an indication that the supervision relationship is going to be successful. In fact, it could be the opposite. Okay, so maybe the person you know and the person you have the best relationship with is not going to be the best supervisor for you in the long run. The other lesson is that the obvious choice is not always the best choice. So just because someone works on topic X and you are interested in doing a project on topic X doesn't mean that that person is going to be the best supervisor for you. So the alignment of expertise or even academic seniority. So just because this person is Professor so-and-so, and there's another person in the department who's, maybe at a more junior level, doesn't mean the more senior person is going to be the best person to supervise your specific topic or your specific project. So expertise and seniority, yes, it's an important factor, but I don't think it's the overriding factor in all cases. The third lesson is consider the person who's best suited not just to get you through the degree, but also post-degree. Who's the person or the center or the group of people you can align yourself with in order to launch your research career once the degree is done. And then the fourth thing that students often overlook is that there is the potential. Again, I stand under correction for maybe some departments have rules against this, but with us and most of the departments I know encourage co-supervision. This means you can choose a main supervisor, but then if you feel like your specific topic would also benefit from the input of someone with linked expertise, maybe it's not directly on your topic, but there's an aspect of your topic that's linked to their work, then you can choose that person as a co-supervisor, as someone else who lends input to your degree and to your work. At UJ, I know that you can even consider co-supervisors outside of that department or outside of that faculty. So if you are doing a project in philosophy, but it's got a mathematical component, you can then source someone in UJ's mathematics department and say, if my main supervisor agrees, would you come on as co-supervisor for this project? And you could find in that way a couple of people who would be best suited towards shepherding you towards success in your dissertation. Okay, at this point, I want to stop for a while and ask for any questions specifically about supervisors and the choice of supervisors before we go on to some considerations about topic. So maybe I can open the floor by asking you, have you already taken those first steps that I suggested? Have you gone on the biographies? Have you sourced out information about the people that could potentially be your supervisors? Have you made contact? Have you found CVs? Do you find the website useful?
Go ahead. You can unmute yourself, Vimbai. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to know, like, for instance, in our case, we already assigned supervisors. Do we have any chance where we can select our own, maybe considering their bibliographies, their areas of interest, expertise, like what you were saying earlier, because we're already assigned. So do we still have that opportunity?
Yeah,
Thank
again,
you.
it's an interesting one. I know some departments, if just because of their ratios of staff to students, what they'll often do in order to make life easy for everyone and to make sure there's a fair distribution of supervision is that they'll basically dictate to students, that you will be working with Professor so and so and on their project. And I know, for instance, in the sciences, the relationship is completely different. You're almost working on that professor's project for them. Whereas in the humanities, there's a lot more focus on the student choosing their own topic. So I can't answer for that department, but what I can say is that you can always make the case. You can always go to the head of department or to the postgraduate coordinator and say, look, I've done some digging. I've got an interest in this topic or in this aspect of this problem. And I've noticed that Dr. So-and-so or Professor so-and-so is really the expert. Is there any chance that I can be moved onto their team or become part of, be one of their supervisees? Is it possible to move things around so that I'm involved with them? There's no harm in asking, at least, even if the answer is going to come back negative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions in the chat? Any other hands? Nothing?
There is nothing on the chats, but we have a hand now from Masoma. You may
Okay.
go ahead. Don't forget to admit yourself.
I wanted to ask, in terms of co-supervising,
Mhm.
is it possible that if I have a supervisor Tuesday and my research topic has an element or require an expertise in someone else who maybe is not working for Tuesdays at other institutions, possible to have a co-supervisor arranged in that way?
Yes, it is possible. It's not always going to be granted. So the answer might not always be yes, but there is the possibility that if you can make a case that shows, this person is really the only one in South Africa or the only one on the continent who's got expertise in this specific thing that is crucial to my project, to my dissertation, then UJ can make arrangements to bring that external person in as the co-supervisor. especially if that person has got some prior relationship with UJ. So they don't have to be employed by UJ, but maybe they've collaborated with UJ in the past on a research project. And this is also the benefit of choosing a supervisor who's linked to a center, because lots of the cases that I know where an external supervisor is brought in has happened through the vehicle of the center. So, we've got professors, visiting professors who are at Durham, but who are co-supervising students who are doing research projects under the center I showed you earlier. So yes, it's possible, but there needs to be a motivation for it. You need to justify to the university why it's going to be beneficial. Okay. Okay, anything else about supervisors? Or shall
We do have some comments on the chat. It looks like the comments came in late.
Oh, I see. Okay, let's hear the comments.
Yes. The first, I'm just gonna go through all the comments that
Okay.
we've missed. So Ricky is saying confidence in conducting advanced research and mastery in a knowledge domain. I think this speaks to the question that you were asking.
About what's lacking.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
the chat came in late. I don't know if it's connectivity or what, but
Okay, no problem.
And also Petka says guidance from expert assistance with helping you navigate through the world of data there is. Okay, so in terms of supervision, Masloma is also asking, okay, I think he spoke about this. He was
Okay.
asking, can you have a co-supervisor outside UJ? You just responded to that. And Petka again is saying, yes, I selected a supervisor in industrial design and I'm considering a co-supervisor in the anthropology department.
Yeah, so it is possible. I mean, in that case, it's within UJ, but in a completely different faculty. But even the other one is possible. So if you request, you can motivate for a co-supervisor to come in externally from outside of UJ. Okay, thank you for those. I'm going to move on to some thoughts about choosing the topic. I know the two things are linked. Okay, so it's not like you can think of them completely separately. Your choice of topic and your choice of supervisor are going to be linked. But there are some things that you maybe haven't thought about, some factors that you might want to take into account when you think specifically about what topic you might choose. Typically, if you've approached a university and you are already in the pre-registration phase, you have some idea about what the topic is going to be. But hopefully I'll give you some advice about how you can start thinking a bit more deeply about issues related to the topic. So how do you choose a topic? Now, I think the stereotype of advanced study, postgraduate study, is that it's sort of knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's intellectual curiosity, and that's sort of always the image that's brought across when people show what it means to conduct postgraduate study. But you also have to be practical. You also have to be realistic. You are going to sink a lot of time. I mean, if you are doing a PhD, you are basically committing to spending the next 4 or 5 years thinking about the same thing, thinking about the same topic, researching the same literature, answering the same question over that time. So you're sinking a lot of time, effort, resources. Okay, this is not a cheap exercise, even if you are being funded. And so it makes sense that you need to make a strategic decision, a good decision about what your topic is going to be. So the first sort of things to think about is, what am I going to have to do with this topic? So, like with anything, they're going to be a set of posts, okay, of signposts that you need to get through, stepping stones towards the end point. And once you come on board as a full-time student, so once you go from a pre-registration to an actual registration, the first obstacle you need to clear is that you need to have a proposal accepted in order to really count as a postgraduate student in that department. So in our faculty, whether you are doing a master's or a PhD, You have 6 months, your first 6 months from your date of registration to choose a supervisor, sign an agreement with that supervisor, and then start preparing a proposal that needs to be accepted by the Department Higher Degrees Committee and the Faculty's Higher Degrees Committee within 6 months. Okay, so I don't know if you are aware of that, but that's the first obstacle in your path. And your choice of topic is going to be a crucial factor in whether you get through that obstacle or not. So I wanted to show you how it is we decide whether a proposal passes, whether it's an acceptable proposal or not. So in the first 6 months of study, this is what we are going to ask you about that topic that you've chosen with your supervisor. This is the template for the proposal. So you're going to have to fill this in as the first real piece of homework that you do as a postgraduate student for master's or for PhD. So we give you this form and you go away and you do the research, and then we say, this is what we want to know about your project now. After consultation with your supervisor, write an introduction where you briefly explain to us what this study is about. Contextualize this study. Tell us what the problem is, why it's important, why you are studying this. Give us your rationale or motivation for why this study should be conducted. And whatever rationale or motivation you give leads to the problem statement. Okay, what are you curious and what do you think warrants a research response in this context, in this problem that you've identified? Crucially, what is the gap or niche for this study? Okay, so at master's and doctoral level, for the first time now, this is a question that's going to be asked of the work that you submit. No one asks this of an undergraduate or really even of an honors study. But where's the gap or niche that you've identified? At honors level and below, it's fine to just be responding to work that already exists. Okay, it's fine to just be analyzing a literature or giving an analysis of scholarship that's already there. At this level, your aim, your topic needs to be one where you can identify a gap, where you can identify a niche and say, well, that's what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to contribute towards knowledge. Okay, and based on that, you are going to then write a study goal or aim and the objectives of your study. So as they say there, so it's sort of a brief introduction for a master's study and up to 2 pages for a doctoral proposal. Okay, besides the introduction, the proposal template then also asks you to do an extensive summary of the literature. So you're going to have to show not necessarily that you've already covered all the relevant literature, but that you at least have an understanding of what that literature is. So again, depending on the topic that you choose and the supervisor that you are going to choose to guide you through that topic, you're going to have to come up with a synthesis of the relevant literature. Okay, that must show that you are familiar with the key authors and texts related to the central concepts relevant to your study. You then also need to show, based on your identification and analysis of that literature, how your study will contribute to what we already know to fill the gap that you identified in that introduction. Okay. Again, this is already you giving a guide. So you're not just quoting people. You're not just sort of paraphrasing work. You are giving your own take on the work. So they say keep direct quotes to an absolute minimum and rather paraphrase with citations. Use primary sources as much as possible. So they give you guidance also for an MA proposal. You're going to have to think about already identifying about 10 texts that are going to be related to your topic. And that's minimum for an MA proposal, in addition to other texts that might deal with methodology or other non-substantive aspects of the study. This part of the proposal should be about a page in total for minor MA. So that's the MA if you are doing for MA coursework, and more if you are doing an MA by research, and about 2 pages for a doctoral proposal. Okay, so you've got the introduction where you've given us your main argument, the aims of your study. Then you give an extensive literature review. Then in our faculty, they also want to know what theoretical or conceptual framework you are going to be working within the study. If you work in a discipline where this isn't making much sense, don't worry. I mean, even in philosophy, this sort of thing isn't really foregrounded as much. But for example, in the social sciences and other disciplines in the humanities, this is crucial. You have to identify what the theoretical or conceptual framework is going to be that you are working with, as well as a research methodology. For example, in the social sciences, are you going with a quantitative study, a qualitative study? Are you designing a survey? Are you collecting data? How are you going to go about, as a methodological point, how are you going to go about completing the study that you aim to complete? And as a general guide, you've got the guide at the bottom there. Introduce the approach and design. So say whether it's qualitative or quantitative, descriptive, a case study, etc., etc. Then define your population sample. So these are all things you need to think about now, in choosing a topic. Is this going to be a topic that lends itself to this sort of thing or not? Describe your methods of data collection, how you will analyze your data, and then for qualitative studies, how you enhance the trustworthiness and rigor of your study. Okay, so these are things you're going to have to account for in the first few months of your registration. So it's something you can start thinking about now when you are formulating in your mind what your study is going to be about and what your topic is. Then we ask for a proposed structure of the study. So basically, you're going to give a skeleton outline of the different, chapters, sections of the study, as well as a few sentences about what the focus of each of those sections or chapters might be when you produce the final study. Ethical considerations. This is, again, important in disciplines where ethical clearance is required. So that's something you need to think about initially. Is the topic that you are envisioning something that would get ethical clearance or not? If not, then you're going to have to come up with a different idea. But it's something you can start thinking about now. And then finally, and most crucially, we want a really explicit statement about what the study is going to contribute to scientific knowledge. So their scientific knowledge obviously is interpreted broadly. Any knowledge that adds to the academic project, not just natural sciences or social sciences, but what are you going to do with the study? What are you going to contribute that doesn't already exist? So what is that gap or that niche that you've identified, and how are you going to fulfill what you've promised in terms of identifying that gap or niche? How are you going to expand the knowledge base of the discipline? Again, that's a crucial thing to think about when you decide on a topic. It's important to alight on a topic that lends itself to that. I mean, in our field, for example, there have been issues that people have been thinking about since 5000 BC, and the needle hasn't moved on those things. So it's sort of slightly ambitious to say that, despite the fact that no one's made any sort of advance in answering this question since 5000 BC, you're going to come in and solve it within the space of 4 years or whatever it is. So find something realistic, find something where there's enough that exists in order to identify a nice gap or niche, but where there's enough of a gap or niche where you can make an explicit claim about having some sort of original contribution to the discipline. Okay, so that's sort of some of the practical things to think about in choosing a topic at the early stages. So this is the first hurdle that you are going to have to clear in your topic. But then you also need to, again, think about the end goal. So reverse engineer the dissertation a bit and think about where you're going to end up. So in the case of the MA, after those 2 years, or in the case of the PhD, after those 4 years, you're going to work with your supervisor, but then you are going to produce a dissertation that's not going to be marked by your supervisor. It's going to be marked, by an external examiner. In UJ, I think we choose 2 external examiners for an MA dissertation, and we choose at least 3 external examiners for a doctoral dissertation. Those 3 examiners examine the written dissertation and then sit in a viva where the candidate verbally defends the written dissertation. So when you think about a topic, put yourself in that position. Imagine 3 years, 4 years down the line when you are sitting with that dissertation. People are marking it, people are looking at it, and they need to decide whether it fulfills the things you've promised in this proposal. Okay. So I want you to look at some of the language that we send to these external examiners and these external people when they decide on whether this study is going to pass muster or not. So this is the assessment criteria we as a department send out for a master's mini dissertation. Okay, so we approach Professor so-and-so from, it could be someone in South Africa or someone externally, and we say, this person has been working with their supervisor for the past 2 years. They've produced this essay. Please look at this essay and tell us whether you think it has the requisite quality to pass as a master's dissertation. And this is the language we send the person in order to guide them in making that decision. And again, this is language you need to think about when you are thinking of a topic. So is this a topic where I'm going to achieve this at the end of the day? What we say, if you look at the first block, does this work, if you want to pass, okay, does this work demonstrate a basic grasp of the topic, a basic knowledge of elementary texts or ideas? How is the reasoning in the course of the study? Will it present any shortcomings at the end of the day for, that prevent it from satisfying the criteria for a pass? What we look for something that goes beyond a pass is something that shows reasonable competence with the material, with the literature, something that's well organized. Does it mount good arguments? Are the arguments well explored? Are a full range of objections to the thesis statement considered? Are there any obvious gaps that still remain in the work? Is there some original thought and ideas for master's level? That's a necessity at doctoral level, but at master's level, it's a positive. So is there original thought? Are there good ideas? Is there rigor in the work? Does the work show good understanding and command of the literature? And then for higher pass, so remember at master's level, if your aim is to not just get a master's degree, but then get a master's degree that's good enough to then get you admission into the PhD, then you need to be aiming at least somewhere in the 70s. And so what you would want is work at the higher end of this range, so 70 to 74. And what we say about work like this is that it does display signs of fruitful, independent thinking. This could be a new idea or new theory, but it could also include the development of a novel critique of existing ideas, or maybe a new interpretation, an extension of an existing argument, a new reply on behalf of an existing position or author, or a comparative exercise which yields something new. Again, this language is structured specifically to philosophy and similar fields, but you'll have a similar set of guidelines, a similar breakdown for work in your field. The key word is always originality. So, has this person really broken new ground in terms of knowledge in this discipline or field? And then for distinction level work, this is, work of the highest level. This is work that demonstrates beyond a doubt that you should be a doctoral student. You should go on to study at the next level. And the work at this level must be clearly structured, thorough, well argued, and at master's level may display a degree of originality. At doctoral level must display that originality. Also a degree of intellectual confidence, either absent from or unwarranted in work of a lower standard. One thing we like to say is distinction level work is memorable for the right reasons and must provoke thought or questions in the mind of the reader. Another way of looking at whether this work is going to be suitable as a good pass in a dissertation is whether you could take aspects of that work and publish it in a journal in that field. Okay, so one of the things, one of the reasons people do postgraduate study in master's and PhD level is that they want to end up as active researchers at the end of the day. So one of the things to think about in your topic is whether it lends itself to becoming publishable research at the end of the day. In fact, many of our students at UJ publish aspects or parts of their dissertations while they are still students. And that's another, sort of notch on your CV and another way of making yourself really marketable as an academic, even before you've graduated and walked across the stage. Again, this is the language we send to examiners of the doctoral thesis. The absolute requirements for this degree is that it must make an original contribution to the body of knowledge in the particular discipline. So in thinking of a topic, think of something that's going to pique your interest, that's going to keep you interested for the next 4 years, on which you can produce 80,000 quality words of an academic dissertation, and one where you've made an original contribution to the body of knowledge in that particular discipline. Okay, so it sounds obvious, it sounds like a lot of detail, but this is absolutely something you need to keep in mind when you are deciding exactly what your topic is going to be. Another way to think of your topic and why you are doing this is think of it in terms of return on investment. Okay, so yes, you've got intellectual curiosity. Yes, you are in this position because maybe there was an aspect of your subject, your discipline you were introduced to at undergraduate level or at honors level, and you thought, you know what, that's interesting and I want to pursue that more. But you're also doing this degree to bolster your own qualifications, bolster your own marketability as someone in your field. And so you need to have a sober look at where your field is at the moment. What's going on in your own discipline in terms of what opportunities are available. So where's all the funding going? If you want to end up as an academic, where's all the funding going in my field? If you want to use this to get a job in industry, or where's the sort of boom area in my industry? And, how is this postgraduate degree going to help me exploit some of those opportunities in this area of my industry? So the analogy, the metaphor I like to use is people often see the dissertation as the thing on the left. Okay, so I'm gonna sink all this effort into this thing for the next 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, and at the end of it, I'm gonna have this magnum opus. I'm gonna have this thing that I get remembered for all eternity. It's gonna be like this oak tree standing in a field that people can look back on for the rest of time and see, how amazing my intellectual work was, and they can go back and read my dissertation. But actually, the metaphor you should maybe think more in terms of is if you zoom in on that oak tree and look at the acorns. So the thing about a mature tree like that, yes, it's magnificent to look at. Yes, it's an amazing achievement. But is it fruitful? So if you zoom in, has it produced seeds? Okay, so has it produced the sorts of things that will allow you in your career, either as an academic or outside of academia, to be productive and be fruitful post this degree, post this dissertation? So has it planted the seeds that is going to give you future success? The only way you can do that is, as I say, is doing an honest appraisal of exactly what sort of situation your field is in at the moment. So because I'm a philosopher, I can only give advice that's pertinent to our field. But you can take this and interpret it in a way that's relevant to your own either academic discipline or discipline outside of academia. And so one of the things you can do now in the pre-registration phase is start doing some research. Okay? Think about your discipline, think about your profession now, and think about how your profession is going to look in 2 years' time, in 4 years' time. The way we do this is, there's certain mailing groups, there's certain Google groups, there's certain bodies that look at the profession of academic philosophy. So the thing on the left is not just philosophy; it's actually all academic faculty positions in higher education, called professorpositions.com. And if you aren't already subscribed, go to that website and subscribe, because what you'll see is that I think once a week, maybe twice a week, you get this in your inbox, and it lists all the positions opening around the world. So at the moment, The first one listed there is a PhD position in education, in tourism. But you get lists of different fields: the sciences, natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, the arts, whatever it is. You get listings of jobs opening up, PhD positions opening up, postdoctoral positions opening up, tutorships opening up, all of those sorts of things. This is a general one on the left. The one on the right is the largest philosophy email list in the world. It's sent out from the University of Liverpool, but it concerns the profession of academic philosophers around the world. And any news pertaining to the job market in philosophy around the world is posted. You're likely to find it on Philocell. Again, if anyone's got a position for a junior lecturer opening up, the first place they'll post it is on Philocell. And so find out what the equivalent email list is for your field. Go and ask people who work in that field. Go and ask the HOD of sociology. Go and ask the coordinators of wherever you are applying to. Say, is there an email list that everyone subscribes to in your department? Or is there a list of such lists? And you go and start subscribing to those lists yourself, so that you can start developing a feel of the ecosystem of the way of the lie of the land in your field. And that can inform your choice of topic, your choice of supervisor, but it's also going to inform the direction your work takes in the next 2 to 4 years. You don't want to work yourself into a position at the end of the day where you come out with a topic or a degree that's not marketable anymore. That's not the flavor of the month anymore. And I'm not saying just be completely fickle and go with wherever the wind's blowing, but you need to be aware. You need to be aware of what's going on in your field. So these are some international ones. There are also some localized ones. So as a community of philosophers in South Africa, we have a Google group called ZAFIL, which is a Google group, and it functions as an email list. So any conference that's being organized, you can see there's the Philosophical Society of South Africa call for their 2025 conference is going out. E-tutor vacancies at UNISA will come out on this list. So it's jobs, tutorship positions, study positions. So if there are scholarships to study MA or PhD at a specific institution, someone from that institution will come on ZAFIL and immediately send that announcement out. If there's a talk happening, the first place that we'll send that out to is the ZAFIL list. So we aren't a big community. We don't have hundreds and hundreds of people teaching philosophy or as academic philosophers in South Africa. But, we are big enough to find this sort of thing really useful as a networking tool and just as an information tool about what's going on in the discipline and in the community. So I would strongly recommend, especially if you're going to end up working locally at a local university or in the local industry once your MA or PhD is done, find out exactly what the equivalent mailing list or Google group is for your field and your discipline. And if you aren't paying attention to it, start paying attention to it on a weekly basis, subscribe to it, and just keep up to date with what's going on there. And then there's also things like the later reports. So this is more like the Skinner of what's going on in the discipline. So recently, for example, there have been lots of updates about academic departments actually being shut down in the UK because of Brexit and the cutting off of funding. If you have scandals happening in the discipline, in any department around the world, people being fired, harassment suits, any of those things related to the health of the discipline in any department around the world, that news makes its way onto this guy's blog. And I know there are similar blogs for the sciences, for example. And I would recommend that you keep an eye on the state of your discipline, the state of your field, by subscribing to these sorts of blogs, or at least following them on a regular basis. There are also some jobs that get posted here. But you just want a general finger on the pulse of the trend that the subject is moving towards. He also does an annual report for the different sub-disciplines within philosophy that are receiving the most funding. So where's all the Templeton funding you see at the bottom there? The Templeton Foundation is one of the biggest funders in the field of philosophy. And so there's news here that they've, set aside another $2.5 million for PPEs, politics, philosophy, and economics at Buffalo University. So you get a sense of where the research funding is going, and you can maybe tailor your own decisions about topic, about supervisor, according to what you suss out about the direction that the funders are pushing and focusing on. Okay, so that's another set of criteria that you can think about in terms of coming up with a topic. Again, the point is just to be tactical, to be strategic. Don't just go with the obvious choice of topic because it's what's in your area of comfort. Think practically, and think tactically about what you are going to want to achieve with the dissertation once it's done, and what you want to use it for. If you want to use it as a springboard towards your academic career, then these are all the things you need to juggle in your mind about the most appropriate topic for you. So that exhausts what I want to say about both supervisor and topic. I'm going to come out of the presentation now and join you in the group to see if there are any questions about topics specifically. But if people still have questions about supervisor, we can link the two things together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. We are now going to open the floor for questions and some engagement.
Okay, here's a question that can open up the discussion. How many of you already have a very clear idea of what your topic is going to be, and how did you decide on that? And has anything about what I've said in this presentation started to get you thinking differently about the choice of topic? Okay, Masluma?
So I had an opportunity to speak with my science supervisor. Not necessarily assigned, but I wrote to her and said there's potential in what I was proposing. So I have an idea, even though it is not completely the way we want it to be, but it's that, she said. So we'll be looking at the experiences and resilience of a former unaccompanied, undocumented finance experience before, through, and after in so for now that's what we just kind of been looking at, and we're gonna start looking at literature along that lines and thanks.
You are muted, Dr. Harris.
I was just saying I couldn't hear what Matloma was saying. He was a bit faint and breaking up a bit, but it sounds like you've got a decent idea of the potential topic. But did you do any of the things I mentioned in terms of research about the potential for that topic to launch a research career once it's done?
Not really, because then I was not I was not informed as this head from testing. I think also think to check on us because we haven't really done much work, but I think attending the testing so weighing what it means for me.
You are muted, Dr. Harris.
I'm sorry. I see there's another question in the chat from Spencer. He says, my question is on the Viva. Are doctoral students expected to go through the exercise? My understanding is yes. So in our faculty, all doctoral students are required to do an oral defense of the dissertation before they can graduate. And my understanding is that that's being rolled out across the university, unless there are specific fields where they make a case for why a Viva is not suitable as a requirement. But my understanding is that it's gonna become universal across the university. Does that answer your question? It could be that in your department there is a different approach. I know that some departments, for example, you have a practical aspect to the study that maybe doesn't lend itself to a verbal defense. And that's fine. But my understanding is, though, that the oral defense is going to be something that's rolled out across most faculties and most disciplines. Are there any other questions? Anything else in the chat that I missed? Okay, if that's the case, Koketso, is it fine if we end it there?
Yes, it's fine. If there are no more questions from the attendees, then we will close the session. Thank you very much, Dr. Harris, for facilitating today's session. Really appreciate your effort.
I'm going to put my email in the chat in case people don't want to ask on this platform but want to email me a question. That's also fine. It's in the chat now.
Can we also ask you to send me the slides so we can make them available on our Moodle community?
Absolutely, I'll do so now.
Thank you so much. And thank you also to the attendees for taking your time to join us in today's session. And we have another session later on today, so please also join that one for the pre-registration program. So in the absence of any comments and questions, we can close the session today. And thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, once again, can I please ask everyone to complete the feedback survey that is on the chat?